Welcome, everyone. We are going to get started in just a few minutes. While we wait for people to join us, it'd be wonderful if you could put your name and institution in the chat so we can all see all the folks who are joining us today. Welcome, everyone. We're going to get started in a few minutes. Meanwhile, please join your colleagues in listing your name and institution so we can see everyone who's joining us today for this webinar. Wonderful to see so many familiar names and new folks. Thanks, everyone. We are going to get started in just a minute. Okay, we're going to let people continue signing in, and I will be getting us started. Again, welcome, everyone. My name is Michal Kurlaender. I'm a faculty member here at the UC Davis School of Education and lead researcher for Wheelhouse, the Center for Community College Leadership and Research, and happy to be hosting our 1-hour webinar this morning. Thank you so much for joining us. As people continue to join in, please let us know that you're here by putting your name and institution in the chat. And I will be trying to monitor the chat as well. Again, welcome for this second the second webinar we've done for the School of Education. Just to get us started, I just want to remind us that it's about an hour, and we'll make sure to leave time for Q&A. So to get us started, as we know, the pandemic drove sharp declines in enrollment, particularly at community colleges. And California colleges stepped up. They rapidly flexed schedules with new options for online and high flex compressed length courses. At the same time, districts and the system at large has tried to streamline students' ability to take courses across multiple colleges, particularly online. This is to further increase student access. We are fortunate to have an opportunity to share our research on these shifts today. I just want to get us on a few housekeeping items before we get started. Our team is going to monitor the Q&A and chat throughout the webinar. We're also going to put important links to our research throughout. If you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A instead of the chat. That's easier for us to monitor. Also, to let you know, a recording of this webinar will be available 1 or 2 weeks following the presentation. Okay. First, just a thank you to our host, the School of Education. We're proud to host this webinar as part of our ongoing commitment to advance teaching, research, and policy to help every learner and student succeed. I also want to take a moment to thank the wonderful communication staff at the School of Education, in particular, Madeline Gorell, also Sophia Meals and Eva Grolnick, who make this work possible. Okay, and finally, Wheelhouse. Wheelhouse was founded, Wheelhouse, the Center for Community College Leadership and Research, was founded in 2016. Our mission is to support student success and equity in the California community colleges by supporting and developing effective institutional leadership. Here you can see a picture of some of our wonderful community college presidents that come to our institutes. We are delighted that one of them is here with us today, Dr. Yamamura. We also, importantly, conduct research to strengthen policy and practice at California community colleges. And we do this in partnership with the state. So the California Community College Chancellor's Office is one of our important state partners. We can advance the slide, please. This work is not possible, our research work is not possible without longstanding partnerships and data sharing agreements and, again, important collaborations with, in particular for this work today, the California Community College Chancellor's Office, Some of the research folks at the Chancellor's office are here with us today and hope they participate in the Q&A. They've also been just wonderful partners for us in all of our research efforts. We do work with the California Student Aid Commission, the California Department of Education, and the Cradle to Career. So state agencies across the causeway for us are really important partners for all of our work. We put out a lot of our research through a variety of venues, both academic publications, but also through Wheelhouse briefs. So we have been in this space, community college space, for quite some time, for nearly a decade, and we've studied everything from financial aid policies and practices, student experiences, transfer pathways, dual enrollment, community college finance, and in particular, pandemic-related enrollment shifts as we've done post the pandemic. Here are some examples of some of our research briefs. You can join our email list to get these. We also are active in LinkedIn, and we will put links in the chat as we talk about specific studies. Okay, I just also want to thank our funders for support of this research, including in particular the Lumina Foundation and the Institute of Education Sciences of the U.S. Department of Education, which funded this along with other work through ARC, the Accelerating Recovery in Community College Network, which brought together teams across the country focused on strategies that community colleges can use to bring back students who left during the COVID-19 pandemic, but really to support their learning, ensure that we can that community college students can continue to succeed in this post-pandemic economy. Wheelhouse is also broadly supported by additional grants from private philanthropy. In particular, we are grateful to the College Futures Foundation and the Gates Foundation for broader support that help us disseminate this work. All right, and finally, a quick introduction of today's presenters. Each of them is going to speak for about 10 to 15 minutes, and then we'll reserve time for Q&A. First, I'm going to present them in the order in which they're speaking. So Dr. Robert Linden is a research fellow at Wheelhouse and the California Education Lab, where he conducts research on student outcomes at the California community colleges, including topics such as financial aid, student-centered funding formula, and a number of studies on enrollment and institutional change following the onset of the pandemic. We also have Dr. Cassandra Hart, who's a professor of education at UC Davis. She is faculty chair of our Capital Area North Doctorate in Educational Leadership program. And Cassie's work has focused on online education in both K-12 and community college, and she has conducted numerous studies on the changing landscape of online learning at California community colleges. And finally, we have Dr. Whitney Yamamura, who is Chancellor of the Coast Community College District, where he has been since 2022. Prior to that, he was president of Folsom Lake College in the Los Rios Community College District, just near us here in Sacramento. And importantly, Dr. Yamamura is also an alum of our Educational Leadership Doctorate here at UC Davis School of Education, and also an alum of our Wheelhouse Leadership Institute. So now I'm going to hand the mic over to my colleague, Robbie Linden, who will start presenting this research.
All right, everyone. Thanks for that, Michal. I'm going to get us started talking through the results of this brief. So yeah, we published this last month. We're pretty excited about the results. I think just to give some sort of motivation and context for how we were thinking, like what our overarching research question was going into this work was we really want to understand broadly how student preferences for college enrollment changed in the online era. And so over the pandemic period, but also in the years before that, we saw a lot of expansion of online course taking across the California community college system. And so our sort of hypothesis is that this worked to spread out enrollment across state regions. It's not just that the total supply of online courses was increasing over the last decade, but we've also seen that the state has sort of streamlined ways that students can enroll in online courses in most colleges across the state. So there's now a central state platform, CVC, the California Virtual Campus. And so over the pandemic period, this platform really expanded a lot. That now includes nearly all of the CCC campuses are participating campuses. And what this allows students to do is to really readily shop around for online courses in any college in the state that will let them meet requirements in their home college. And so our sort of hypotheses going into this study is one that students now have access to a much larger supply of online courses. And so this might mean that students' choice for their first college is maybe not going to be as local as it was in years prior. But it also might mean that we're thinking that students are going to be more readily able to enroll in multiple institutions over their academic trajectories, in particular because of the state virtual campus makes it easier to do so. And so throughout these analyses that we're going to present today, we're really interested in this relationship between students' choice in modality, whether they're in online or in-person courses, and how that impacts their enrollment across institutions. In this first research question, we're going to start really broad and ask how has enrollment shifted by modality and by institution in the online era? Our measures here, we're going to have a few measures for students' enrollment modality, whether they're enrolled in online only, in-person only, or multimodal courses, the last being a combination of online and in-person courses, and also a set of measures by institution, which is whether they're enrolled in one or multiple institutions. Our sample here is first-time credit students who are not dually enrolled in high school. And for the analysis period, we're going to capture student enrollment windows in their first 2 years of enrollment. So all these measures above are going to be measured over students' first 2 years after initial enrollment for the 2014 through 2022 cohorts. On the left-hand side, we see a really stark change in enrollment behavior by modality. So this blue line is the rate of students who are enrolled entirely in in-person courses over their first 2 years. And so this rate has declined really precipitously just in the few years that we've had since the pandemic. So 2018 would have been the last cohort to be unaffected by the pandemic in their first 2 years. And so for this cohort, we see that over half of students were enrolled entirely in in-person courses. The second largest group was multimodal enrollers, those enrolled in a mix of online and in-person courses at about 44%. And finally, the rate of students enrolled only in online courses was very small at about 3%. And so in just 5 years, for the 2022 cohort, which is the most recent cohort of data we have available, we see really stark changes in enrollment behavior by modality. So now the most common modality of enrollment is multimodal. About 2/3 of students are enrolled in a mix of online and in-person courses. And we see about equal rates of the online only and in-person only at about 16 and 18%, respectively. On the right-hand side, we're looking at enrollment trends by institution of whether a student enrolls in one institution or multiple institutions in their first 2 years of study. And so we see more modest changes here. For cohorts that were not impacted by the pandemic, right before 2018, the rate of students enrolled in multiple institutions was about 14%, and this increased to 18% in the most recent cohorts that we have available. And so this is still a substantial increase, about a 30% over baseline, but it is still much more common, even in the online era, for students to be enrolled in one institution rather than multiple in their first 2 years. The second analysis I'm going to present asks whether when students begin enrollment in the California Community College system, whether they are choosing colleges that are farther from home now than in years past. And so the idea here is that because it is much more easy to enroll online in a campus that is farther from their home, that the increased supply of online courses has possibly shifted geographic enrollment patterns and made it more spread out, where students are possibly less likely to enroll in a local campus than they were pre-pandemic. We're going to use a measure here of a non-proximate enrollment, which we define as a student's enrolling at a campus that is outside of a 30-mile radius of their residence. We're going to look at a sample of first-time credit students not dually enrolled in high school. So the same sample we looked at before, but the difference here is that for the analytical period, we're just going to look at a student's first term of enrollment for 2014 to 2023 cohorts, which is going to capture their their preference for campus in their first term of enrollment. So the red line here is showing the overall non-proximate enrollment rate. And we see that pre-pandemic, this rate was pretty stable at around 10% and grew modestly to 12% by 2023. And so again, like we saw with the multi-institutional enrollment rate on the previous slide, this increase, we are seeing this increase in students who are enrolling farther away from their home, but it's pretty modest compared to the very stark shift towards online course taking. One other trend that really sticks out here is this yellow line, which is the rate of students enrolling outside that 30-mile radius, but just among students who are enrolled only in online courses. So at the beginning of the analytical period in 2014, it was likely going to be very hard for a student to find many online courses at a local college. And this is just because there was a much smaller supply of them. And so what we see here is that students were about 30 to 40% of students enrolled only in online courses were at a campus 30 miles outside their commuting radius. But over this period, as the supply of online courses increased, those enrollments became more and more local. And so I think this was one really surprising finding in this study is that while we were going in thinking that, at least theoretically, online courses could spread out enrollment across the state, in practice, what it's done is kept students enrolled locally. That our sort of theory here is that when the supply of courses really increased at students' local institutions, it kept them enrolled closer to home because they weren't having to seek those courses out in colleges farther away across the state. And so I'll just say here, I was on the previous slide, we looked at the non-proximate enrollment rate. Here I'm just showing the total number of non-proximate student enrollments. And so in the past 4 years, we see that overall, there's now a higher number of first-time students that are enrolled at a campus outside a 30-mile commuting radius. And this is both driven by that increasing overall rate we saw, but also that after some steep pandemic enrollment losses in 2020 and 2021, we've seen continued year-over-year enrollment growth for a few years. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Cassie. You're muted.
Thank you. So our third research question here continues to look at this idea around being enrolled in multiple institutions, except now instead of looking across cohorts or across different terms for the same student, we're kind of looking within like a single term, when we're defining where students' home campus is based on where they were primarily enrolled the first term that they enrolled. So at the term where Robbie was addressing when they're doing their proximate enrollment decision, wherever they land with the most units in their first term, that's what we're defining as their home college. And then we're kind of seeing in subsequent terms, do they opt to enroll in other colleges to fill out their schedules? And so that's what we're considering a cross-enrollment. A cross-enrollment is enrollment at a campus other than the home campus that is defined based on your first term. And so here we're looking from 2014-15 to 2023-24. So because we're not looking at like a whole 2-year period, we're able to extend a little bit further out. So Robbie, if you don't mind changing slides here so we can see some of these results. I'm a little bit jealous of Robbie's controlling the slides, so he had access to the cursor. So maybe you could kind of try to follow along with the points in the slides I'm talking about here. But these graphs are showing us the home enrollment and cross-enrollment rates over time in overall in in-person courses and online. So a couple of key trends here. First of all, you can see that pre-pandemic, we see decreasing enrollments overall, both in the any modality and in person. So even pre-pandemic, we're seeing a little bit of decrease in enrollments across the system, and particularly in those in-person classes. And then of course you can see precipitous drops in those during the pandemic period as students pull back from enrollments. At the same time, in our yellow graph here, you can see that the enrollment rates are increasing substantially. And even before the pandemic, they're increasing, they're upward slanting, both for the home enrollments, which is our solid lines, and for the cross enrollments, which is our dotted lines. And then both of those actually pick up during the pandemic. So as people are pulling back, of course, in in-person enrollments, as those aren't being offered anymore, we see a really massive increase, especially in home online enrollments. So one thing that's really important for our overall story is that during the pandemic, you see both home and cross enrollments increasing in terms of the absolute numbers for online enrollments. But we see that the uptick is especially sharp for home enrollments. And this really follows the story that Robbie was telling, where we think that as there are more options being offered at the home campus, students can look around for other colleges that are offering the courses they want to, but increasingly they don't have to. It's more available to them in their home campuses. So let's move over to the next slide now. And this basically tells the same story in terms of the share of in-person, online, or both modalities that are being taken through cross-enrollments. And so this tells, I think, a story that we had to kind of think through based on what we saw in the prior slides. So you can see here that for any modality and in-person classes, these trends are kind of downward sloping a little wiggly, but largely flat. So it looks like over time, there's not quite drastic changes, right, in how many course enrollments are being taken through cross-enrollment. On the other hand, for the online courses, we see that enrollments are, even as there are more online enrollments and more kind of online cross-enrollments, because the expansion in availability of online courses at home is increasing even faster than the uptake of cross-enrollment of online courses, you actually see declines over time in the share of online courses that are being taken at other campuses. And that sharpens up during the pandemic and kind of makes there be the story that they're actually conditional. As long as you're taking an online enrollment, you're actually more likely to be taking that online enrollment at your home campus than you were if you were taking an online enrollment pre-pandemic. So this really kind of interesting story about the increased availability of online courses in other campuses during the pandemic. People are taking advantage of those opportunities, but because the online options are available at home, if they can take those online options at home, it looks like they really are. I think we had a question in chat around how this looks in terms of in-district versus out-of-district enrollment. And that was something that we were curious about as well. And I know we have a lot of California people on the call, but for those of you who aren't or who maybe aren't in the community college space, one of the unique features about California community colleges is that there's a district setup, kind of similar to the way that K-12 districts exist, so that within a district there may be only a single college, but in some cases there are multiple colleges within a district. And these can kind of share resources and information and certainly familiarity, so that it can be easier to do cross-enrollments within a home district. And this has especially become true as online systems have become more coordinated within districts, so that, for instance, in the Los Rios district, which is close to where we are in Davis here, it's been made easier for people at one college to take courses at a sister college without having to have a lot of hassle around financial aid systems and new applications and things like that. And so as a result of, we believe, as a result of some of these efforts to streamline cross-enrollments, especially for online courses pre-pandemic, you can see that when we look at the online courses, there had been kind of increasing rates of online enrollments being taken through in-district cross-enrollment prior to the pandemic. And all of the types of online cross-enrollment decreased during the pandemic, again, consistent with there being more online courses that students want available at their home campuses. But there's been this kind of shift over time to more of those online enrollments being taken within districts, in those multi-college districts. Let's see. I mean, there's this sort of interesting pattern that you can also see around this any modality, where the in-district rates of multi-college districts really kind of increased during the pandemic period. This is again consistent with the fact that we just see a much larger shift to online courses, which have an overall higher rate of cross-enrollment, particularly again with that increase in the in-district during the pandemic period. So, we do see some suggestion that there's a movement towards more, especially within district cross-enrollment. So another key set of questions we had was around how cross-enrollment rates vary by student subgroups and across different course subjects. And so to look at this, Robbie, if you can move the slide forward one more time. Here we're just zeroing in. It was a little bit visually overwhelming to show all of these differences for all of the years. So we're focusing just on 2023-24 at the rates of cross-enrollment in person and online for a bunch of different student subgroups defined by age, race, gender, and then financial aid receipt. And a couple of key trends stand out here. So the blue bars are the share of enrollments that are taken as cross-enrollments in person. The yellow bar is the share of enrollments taken as online cross-enrollments. And a couple of key things we can note here is that there are certain groups that are more likely to be cross-enrolling across the board, and online in particular. And so this bar for the age 24 plus or older students stands out as being, having higher rates of in-person cross-enrollment and online cross-enrollment. And so, this we think is probably indicative of there being more constrained schedules for working adults compared to younger students. And so they might be sort of forced to look outside of their home campus for things like evening classes, if we're thinking about in person, and certainly for online classes. They might be more dependent on that modality and therefore really kind of need to search out online courses if they're not available in their home campus. We also see higher rates of cross-enrollment for Black students, a little bit higher face-to-face, but in particular substantially higher online. So, the other race ethnic groups have kind of much more similar looking bars, but for Black students, we really do see much more of a tendency to take advantage of online cross-enrollment, so looking kind of at different opportunities across campuses. Okay, why don't we move on to subjects here? So here we're looking at each enrollment based on the subject of the course that's being offered. And again, we can see across the board that there are some pretty notable differences in different subjects. So one thing that I think really stands out here is this very tall bar for health. And this is really being driven by a lot of cross-enrollment in person. And so one thing that we heard in interviews with community college leaders during the pandemic was that health subjects in particular, a lot of those were a little bit hard to move online, and so they're to the extent that health enrollments, if there's still some kind of recovery in terms of in-person offerings, it seems like people are really being driven to look kind of across campuses to make sure that they're getting those offerings. It's kind of speculating a little bit about exactly what's causing these differences, but the fact that you see a lot of cross-enrollment in person for health fields is, I think, really interesting. And something that's also kind of echoed in other fields that historically we've heard are difficult to offer online, such as physical sciences and biological sciences. So, to the extent that students prefer taking these in person, and the face-to-face offerings maybe haven't fully kind of recovered to the full availability that they had pre-pandemic, this may be manifesting itself in more cross-enrollment in person for those subjects. On the other hand, there are certain subjects where we see a lot of use of online cross-enrollments. And so one that really stands out here, I think, is business and management, where you don't see, there's a lower rate across the board of in-person cross-enrollment, but a very high level of courses being taken online through cross-enrollments. Similarly, other subjects that kind of stand out in that respect are family and consumer sciences, psychology, social sciences, all of those look like they're having a bit higher uptake of online cross-enrollment. All right. And then the last question that we were looking at was how cross-enrollment rates vary by receiving college. And this is a little bit complicated to think about, Robbie, if you don't mind going to the next slide, because when we were thinking about what enrollment belongs to a college, we sort of decided that two types of enrollments were things that could plausibly be taken at a home college. And the things that we thought about there were all of the enrollments taken by students who called that college home. So even if they ultimately took it somewhere else, we were like, that could have been an enrollment that stayed at the home college if there were kind of online offerings available. And then all of the offerings that, or all of the cross enrollments that came into the college. And so all of those were things that we counted as potential enrollments for the college. And then what we were looking at is the share of total possible enrollments for that college that were taken importing enrollments from other colleges. So they're receiving enrollments from students who are leaving their home college to enroll at kind of the focal college. So it's kind of a complicated way of thinking about it. But you can see here that there's a lot of variability. I mean, really what we're thinking about here is, there's kind of discussion around if some colleges do a better job than others of attracting cross enrollments in. And so what we do see here is that there's a lot of variability in the extent to which colleges are importing enrollments from other colleges. And you can think about this as the total import rate is the size of the blue and yellow bars combined. You can see that there's a really large range from some colleges importing less than 5% of their enrollments to some importing around a quarter or more of enrollments from students who didn't originally start at that college and call it home. You can also see that there's a really big variability in the extent to which colleges are having these imported enrollments come in person versus online. So in some colleges, it's fairly even whether they're in person or online. And in some, you can see, I'm looking at a bar that's like 5 from the bottom here, there's a really, really tiny share of in-person enrollments, and just a giant share of it is that gold bar that represents online cross-enrollment. So a college like this isn't bringing very many people in face-to-face, but is really bringing a lot of people in online. So a lot of variability across both of these domains.
Thank you so much. Yes. You're an echo, but hopefully, Maddie, we can turn it over to Dr. Yamamura.
Hello, everybody. I have the privilege of being able to be on the panel. I'm the practitioner, I guess, of the group. So I have it easy. I didn't have to do all the heavy lifting and the research and the analysis there. And so, as Dr. Kurlaender mentioned, spent over 30 years in the Los Rios system as a faculty member, dean, vice president, or chief academic officer, and multi-college president, and then now in Orange County as a chancellor. Just to give a brief sense of a perspective that I might help lend is that the Coast College District has 3 colleges along the coast of Orange County. The oldest being Orange Coast College. It's the most traditional college. It's 70 to 80% on ground. They have 850 bed student housing. They're the 3rd largest group of students in California community colleges for international students. So by definition, the international students are on the ground attending the college. And they have their share of career education programs, which again, by definition, are on ground: welding, aviation, radiology technician, and the maritime program, which is the only maritime program for a community college in California. Golden West College has a mix of about 50-50 online and on ground. They also have a significant presence, career education. There's a post-certified academy for sworn officers on the grounds, and there's a very large nursing program and a very large auto program. So again, by definition, those students would be tied to on-ground learning. And then Coastline College, founded in the mid 70s, the slogan originally was a college without walls. So a very innovative feature at that time. The district created a college based on cable classes. I don't know if anyone's old enough to remember that. I certainly was, where students would log into the local public access cable channel and at certain times and get lectures and be able to engage with faculty and be evaluated through email or other means or snail mail as well. And so then with broadband, Coastline moved to broadband. And so 90% of their offerings are online pre-pandemic. All of their degrees, associate's degrees, are all offered 100% online, including general education. So, if you will, my district, the three colleges span the range of offerings for on ground and online. So, with that as a background, I can also share that we are about average in terms of inter district students. 20% of our students go to more than one of the three colleges. Some of them go to one other, some of them go to the other two colleges. So again, the stats are around what we'd expect in terms of a multi-college district with cross-enrollment at 20%. I think it was really good that we know anecdotally, in terms of COVID, where we all were forced to offer courses online because we couldn't meet in person, and that really did accelerate offerings post-COVID, where faculty found that they enjoyed teaching online. Some of them that may not have considered that before, and this demand for students. After all, in California, we're paid by student enrollment. And so we want to attract as many students as possible. And so I think there's been an emphasis because students want more online classes than ever before. So it's nice to see that validated in actual research, those sort of anecdotal assumptions that we have. I would say, too, that one of the major shifts, a lot of times, outside of the California community college system, there's an assumption that most of the students that go to a California community college are the traditional student, the 19 to 20, 22-year-old student. But typically, the average age is much older than that, in the mid 20s. You have a lot of vets that return from their tour of duty and then go back to community colleges. And so you also have many adults with a 40-hour regular day job. And so post online offerings, pre-COVID, you had a lot of students that would work and then go to their nearest community college on the ground. So to me, that's where you see some of the students in terms of a potential cross between where they live and their home zip code and their home college. And if they work 30 miles away from their home, where they might get off work and go to that college to take classes at night. So with the advent of a lot of online classes, the proliferation of them post-COVID, my sense is that many of those adult learners with 40-hour-a-week jobs now find it very convenient to go online, so that anecdotally, the number of evening offerings have shrunk, and proportionately, you've seen an increase in online offerings. And so again, that's where I think many of those adult learners have gone. Also, I think we should talk about synchronous versus asynchronous. So for us in online, if you have a asynchronous class, that means you don't have a set time, a set hour, and set days for the students to log on with you, with the faculty member for those specific classes. Typically, that means then you're posting discussion boards, you give assignments with due dates, and so students in asynchronous classes can log on whenever they choose, midnight, whenever the kids are to bed, whenever they get off work, if they're on graveyard, whatever it happens to be, and engage with the material and study whenever they choose. With a synchronous class, again, there's a set time and a set date, even if it's online. Very typically, that would be communication studies classes where you're asked to communicate, present speeches, and all. And so, more commonly, I think you would see a lot of intro to comm studies classes where it is synchronous, where the class members are getting together at a certain date and time. So there could be a difference in terms of flexibility for taking online, whether the classes are synchronous or asynchronous. The other aspect, as was mentioned, that we have the California Virtual Campus that's grown tremendously in size. And as was pointed out in the research, you have to have above a 2.0 GPA so that you're a good student, and that those classes meet a certain threshold in terms of quality and standards. And so with that said, my memory and understanding is there are some transfer level math classes, specifically statistics, where some colleges have a 3-unit class that satisfies the transfer level to the CSU and the UC as a college class, and some are 4 units, and there might even be some classes that are 5 units. Well, if you have astute shoppers, they would rather take a 3-unit class than a 5-unit class in terms of the investment of time. And so to that extent, they might go shopping and look for online classes that may meet the same requirements, but also have fewer units. So that could be a factor in terms of students going beyond their home campus. There was a mention in terms of hybrid classes in the study. So hybrids evolved, and all the practitioners know across the system. We designate hybrid if, in fact, there is any requirement for face-to-face or on-ground contact. So you have some classes where the faculty member want a final on ground, or maybe a midterm and a final on ground. So they want to be able to look the students in the eye, and that's part of their process for ensuring the integrity in terms of the students enrolling in their classes. So obviously then there would be it would be a hardship if a student normally takes classes at their home college, they would be inclined to take a hybrid class that has any on-ground requirement at their home college. And again, with the proliferation of online classes across the system post-COVID, it's a natural tendency, I think, for students to have a comfort level with their home college. And the reality is that whether it's a single college district or a multi-college district, the typical multi-college district, you have the same application. They have the same student ID number that transfers them within the colleges in that district. The financial aid records and the records for counseling transfer between colleges in a multi-college district. So there's a lot of seamless aspect within a multi-college district. However, the moment you go outside, again, our neighbor colleges, a student might actually be between Golden West College and Huntington Beach and Long Beach College across the border in Orange County, and it's in its own district, right? So they might be between the two. If they take classes between the two, they have to register separately at Long Beach. They get a separate student ID number. They get separate emails and communications from the other college. Whereas if they traveled a little bit farther down to Orange Coast College, because it's in the same district, again, they don't have to reapply. They get the same student ID number. They have the same email communications across the system. And their financial aid and counseling notes are transportable amongst the colleges within the district. So I think that's a sort of a key variable in terms of whether students stay within a multi-college district or go outside, to the extent that they are aware of that. Also, again, with regard to dual enrollment, that's increased with a heavy emphasis across the state. A tremendous advantage for high school kids to get college classes. It could be as formalized as getting your early middle college, where you're getting when you graduate from high school, you're graduating with your associate's degree at the same time. And getting all of your units, and therefore you're ready to transfer as a junior into the university system, CSU, UC, or privates, or out of state. And but with that, then the CVC, the statewide network, does not allow high school kids in that, as was pointed out in the research. So again, those high school students are going to be local. They're typically on the ground, even if they take hybrid classes from the home college, so that they're going to be much more tied to the home college. Also, again, I've been emphasizing the brands of the college, and that typically in the sense meaning career education. So as an example, in this area, Orange Coast College has the RadTech, the Radiation Technology program. But because of the number of graduates need to match the number of jobs, it's the only college in the region. So you're going to even go from outside of the region, outside of our district, if you want to become a radiology technician, to come to Orange Coast College. That's also true in my former district, that the basic radiation technology degree was outside of the four colleges in the Los Rios district. But if you had wanted advanced specialized in RadTech, then those classes were offered at Folsom Lake College. So that could also be a factor in terms of the career education degrees, where you're going to be on ground, or because of our regional agreements in California, you're going to go to a specific college, even if it's not your home college. So to me, those are sort of variables that are relevant in terms of the research that was done by Wheelhouse.
Thank you so much for that, for the reflections. We have a couple questions, and I think Dr. Yamamura, Chancellor Yamamura, raised a whole bunch of others that I think will come up on just the important complexity of this sort of good externality of increased flexibility and portability, but also some of the challenges associated with that. I just want to make sure we get to the couple questions. Important question from Robert Penman about specifically a kind of transfer-bound population. Just want to sort of, again, reiterate that what makes the community colleges in California and more generally so important is the heterogeneity of the kind of diversity of the students that they educate, and the variety of educational goals, one of them being transfer to four-year. So Dr. Hart or Dr. Linden, any thoughts on this particular question? We looked at subjects and others, but you want to speak to the transferability, or at least in future work that we plan to do? Who would like, Robbie, you want to take this one first?
Yeah, sure. So like Michal said, so this is one subgroup. We did not run results for this subgroup specifically, but yeah, it's really important and a good research idea. We should going forward. One thing we heard from online leaders in the state is that a big reason that they see for cross-enrollment, or just something that's an important function that students get out of this, is being able to meet requirements for transfer and other academic milestones of getting a course before a date needed for transfer that they might not be able to get at their home institution. And that might not just be the specific course, but it could be something like when the course finishes, that it's in, that it's half a semester rather than a full semester, allowing them to sort of meet this transfer deadline. So I think we might, if that's true, I think we might expect slightly higher cross-enrollment for that transfer-bound population. And I think that's something we'll definitely want to run in future work.
Great. Cassie, I'm hoping you might answer this question in a different way, which I think I read into Robert's questions about also just the proportion of courses that are taken online of interest, also more generally, and given your broader work on course modality, I wondered if you might speak to that a bit.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think consistent with what we're seeing here, there's been a really, obviously, just a huge kind of sustained increase in the share of courses that are offered online and taken online. But I think one of the things that's going to be kind of interesting too, we haven't done this yet, but I think your question kind of speaks to this. around both kind of the availability of pathways that fully prepare you to transfer online and home colleges, and also that offer full credentials, so AA degrees, AS degrees, and full credentials in home colleges. So I think one of the things that'll be really kind of interesting to see is the extent to which people are more able to piece together those fully online pathways in their home college without having to cross-enroll, or kind of checking to see if it has become easier for people, if needed, to do things, as Robbie was saying around, I need to kind of fulfill these requirements right prior to transfer. So yeah, I think that's going to be a really interesting area for future work, even if it's not one that we've looked into fully yet.
Thank you. We have a question from Catherine Sedonis on the geography dimensions of this. I think Whitney raised these really important ones, even within more urban settings, district boundaries, but there's also kind of rural spaces where we might think that students, may be more inclined to enroll online anyway. Robbie, do you want to add anything to our geographic analysis? Yeah.
Yeah, this is a finding that really surprised us. So on the last slide that Cassie presented, we showed the import rates across colleges, and so we don't publish like college names in our work, but when looking through these results at just the share of college enrollment that's comprised of cross enrollments, we were really surprised to find that a lot of the colleges that are top importers are in sort of rural, more remote parts of the state. And what was also interesting is that it was not those cross enrollments were not just imported through online, that we might expect that because of the geographic barriers, that to the extent that those colleges do import cross enrollments, that they'd be online. But we saw a lot of those campuses were importing high shares through face to face. So I think that was just a really surprising finding, that the enrollment is just more nuanced than we'd expect. And I think we're interested too in what programs and courses are drawing, particularly those face-to-face cross enrollments.
Great. Thank you, Robbie. We have a question from Terrence Willett, knows a thing or two about community colleges. Thanks, Terrence, for being here. A question for you, Whitney, about offering for more online. Has the offering for more online ed increased the diversity of the faculty hiring pools?
Anecdotally, perhaps, but most colleges want faculty, even if they're online, to be close to home so that faculty can see each other face to face in department meetings, and that there's that intangible of being able to see each other and engage each other in person, despite the virtues of online. So many faculty still are geographically bound, or colleges prefer geographical relation. Even Coastline, for their full-time faculty, express a desire that all department meetings are done in person so that faculty can engage each other.
Thank you. That's really helpful. We have a question from Tracy Falk. Nice that you're here, Tracy, that I'm going to answer about AP or dual enrollment. And just a plug for you to, Wheelhouse has done a lot of work on dual enrollment. Whitney mentioned as well. It's just a huge portion of the increasing enrollment at community colleges. Dual enrollment, for folks who don't know, is the students in high school enrolled in community college courses while they're still in high school and getting college credit. What's best for students, it really does vary. So people take, the key here is that students, the question is, is AP course taking or dual enrollment better? The reality is what's good is for high school students to get exposure to college level courses, college rigor, that can be done in multiple ways. What makes dual enrollment so powerful is that it's already an entree to college. Students, we get like a taste for the college experience, credits that will likely either transfer, lead to degree outcomes, as Cassie suggested. And so the importance here is also just kind of to have more streamlined systems between high school and college, and a warmer handoff for high school students, especially first generation high school students who are entering college. So we want to see expansion of dual enrollment, even as advanced placement continues to be heavily used in high schools. David Ulate, an alum of the School of Ed. Hello, Dr. Ulate is asking about fraudulent enrollments that have been a huge issue for community colleges. We do not address those, but we do do a lot of quality control to our data before we ever work with it. Robbie, I don't know if you want to say anything about this before we turn it also to Whitney to answer this question about fraudulent enrollments.
Yeah, I mean, so we've just heard from so many college leaders that, yeah, this is a really big issue, particularly post-pandemic. I mean, what I can say is that we measure a student enrollment in a course after the census deadline. I think at which time a lot of these fraudulent enrollments are filtered out. I can't say so much specifically about college efforts, but I guess from my understanding, I think yeah, that we ought to be capturing enrollment sort of after colleges have done this filtering.
Yeah, I would add the same thing. The initially the screening process, we've been much more engaged in screening, fighting AI with AI, so that by the time the census date comes around, which is for an 18-week full community college semester, the old traditional one, 3 weeks in would be the census date. So by then, there's some type of evaluation that typically the faculty have done, so they know whether a student is real or not.
Great. See if we had one more, but if not, I guess I'll just give our panelists an opportunity to think about in this phase. We're kind of post pandemic, and as we think about portability of courses and just more general cross enrollments, as we think about really the goal of just supporting more students to get what they need to and to make advances towards their educational goals, degree goals. I just wondered if there's any, whether from the research side where we're headed or from the policy and practice side. Whitney, if any parting words as we close out our webinar. Whitney, why don't we start with you?
Oh, wow. Yes, I again, any increase in availability for our students. Our mission is open access for California Community College. That's our role in the higher ed master plan. So, having online in different modalities, hybrid courses, makes a lot of sense in terms of how our students, working adults, need to receive education and how it best works for them. So I think that we'll continue to work and expand in this area, and hopefully we do for the sake of our mission.
Great, thank you. Robbie?
Yeah, I'll just add that I think as is the case with any quantitative study, I think like one limitation or just area we couldn't address is really the why behind student cross enrollment. And I think like some of the aspects we've already talked about today of helping students get meet course requirements under a sort of a time crunch of getting that course when they need it, of maybe they need the online course or under like a half semester schedule, that I think through like student interviews and focus groups, it would just in future work, it would be really great to understand sort of what are these drivers behind the cross enrollment patterns we presented today.
Great, thank you. Cassie, last word?
Yeah, I'll say that I would echo some of the words that Chancellor Yamamura had around the mix of courses that colleges are offering. I think it's going to be really interesting to see. We saw an increase in synchronous courses during the pandemic, a really, really big surge in those. And so I'm very curious to see how sustained the offerings that allow people to have a little bit of that engagement of online, of real-time interaction, but with the flexibility and the ability to not have to commute into campus that online, the synchronous courses offers. I think that's going to be something that's really interesting to look at, and also just kind of ongoing efforts by colleges to improve the quality of their online courses. So one thing that we're looking at in future work is around professional development for online course quality and the extent to which that moves the needle on student outcomes. So lots of really interesting areas to look at in the future, I think.
Yes, very fruitful area for future research. I want to thank everyone, especially also just should have shout out earlier to Susanna Cooper, the extraordinary executive director of Wheelhouse, all possible because of her leadership of our center. And thank you to all of you for joining us today to tune back in both to future School of Ed webinars, but also to Wheelhouse research and developments coming out of our center. So thank you all for being here. And with that, we will close out our webinar. Thank you.